To start it, Lily, or do you want me? Okay, there we
There
go.
we go. Good. Thank you. Good morning, all, and welcome to our May Working Lands Enterprise Board meeting. The first line of business this morning is to approve the meeting minutes from April 15th. So I'd be looking for a motion to do so.
This is Alan, so moved.
Thank you, Alan. Do we have a second? Allison Lowell, second. Thank you. Are there any corrections? Comments? Not seeing any. All those in favor say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Thank you. The motion carries. We're going to start with our administration updates. And I think hopefully we can wrap that up before our presenters come on at 9:30. Who do we have on from ACCD? I'm not sure I saw anybody from ACCD. I don't want to miss them though. All right, we're gonna move forward. Catherine, do you want to start with FPR or do you want to wait for Oliver?
I would suggest waiting for Oliver.
Okay. Then perhaps I will turn to, let's see, Abby, are you on? Would you like to give a update from the Ag Dev perspective for Ag?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
I'm just getting out of the car, so my camera's not on, but good morning, everyone. This is Abby Willard from the Agency of Ag. I was thinking the two updates that we could offer, maybe three, would be we have learned that there have been some recent announcements of federal funds, including the allocation of our specialty crop block grant program, which is great news. So it's a small amount of funds of federal block grant that come to the agency, but it's about $315,000. We've been waiting for those funds to be released since January. So glad to see them available and for us to fund kind of the anticipated projects in the specialty crop, which is like non-animal feed or energy products, but fruits, vegetables, maple, honey, Christmas trees, nursery crops, etc. And we also just announced and released over $3 million in Resilient Food System Infrastructure Grant Awards, so both in the infrastructure category and equipment only awards. So again, another one-time federal program and great source of funding for larger scale businesses to do what's called middle of the supply chain. So not the production end and not the market access end, but the middle of the supply chain investments. And we've been waiting again for multiple months for final approval from U.S. Department of Agriculture to be able to announce those awards and execute those agreements. So that's feeling really exciting. And then again, on behalf of the Agency of Agriculture, there was just a series of dairy industry listening sessions that have wrapped up. And so there were, I think, 16 in-person meetings and 4 virtual sessions that Laura Ginsberg, our Dairy Strategy and Innovation Manager, led on behalf of the agency to be able to hear from Vermont's dairy industry about where there are opportunities and challenges and kind of areas for investment and prioritization. So exciting to have those meetings have been concluded and soon to have a report of those findings. I think in the last Working Lands meeting, you all received the update about the Dairy Delivers publication. Did that happen? Yes. Seeing Sarah nod, so that's great. So again, I won't reiterate that new dairy industry marketing resource that just came out. So this is the Ag Development Division's kind of like granting time of year when we get to make a lot of announcements about dollars out the door, which is an exciting opportunity, but also excited to complement that with some community engagement efforts. I think that's what I was planning. Anything else that I've missed?
Thank you, Abby. Are there any
Oh,
questions? Excellent. One piece that I will follow up on is the legislative, where we currently are. We expect the legislature to be here for a couple more weeks as they wrap up the session. S-124 is the bill that we refer to as the CAFO bill, Confined Animal Feeding Operation, which should satisfy the EPA's requests of change statutorily to be in compliance with the CAFO program. So any farms that are discharging will be under Agency of Natural Resources. H-484 is a housekeeping bill. We refer to it as miscellaneous ag subjects. We hope to get that across the finish line, as well as S-45, which is the right to farm. The right to farm passed with overwhelming support in the Senate and has been in House Judiciary. House Ag has been doing a walk by, as they call it, since they don't have physical, the bill itself physically hanging on their wall. So they're going to be making recommendations back to House Judiciary, as I understand it, and our hope is we end up with that bill passing by the end of the session. H-398, Sarah, which was the VETA language for the leftover BGAP money, is off to the governor for signature. So that's good news. And then my understanding is that S-60, which is the Farm Security Fund, has not, I think it's in one of the money committees, and I'm not certain as though it's going to move out. So we will continue to monitor S-60. I think that's it for bills that we see still currently moving or action on. I'm happy to take any questions. Pretty quiet group today.
And just in case I missed it, did Abby indicate that Working Lands will only be getting $1 million next year?
Yes, the base is in the budget, so $1 million. We did not mention that. Thank you, Ellen.
Yeah, so attempts to try to get another 2 million in one time or get the base up were unsuccessful, unfortunately. Not out of a lack of interest, I think, but more just the funding environment. And so the Working Lands Coalition is realizing that we need to start earlier in the year, and I think we'll be putting together a meeting sometime over the summer to try to regroup and better organize well in advance of the fall budget development process. So we'll keep you posted on that, but unfortunately, we'll only have $1 million to work with next year. So that'll impact our symposium conversations because we'll know the amount of money that we have to work with next year.
Thank you, Ellen. Are there any questions? I don't think Oliver's joined. I don't see Elizabeth, Nance. I'll make sure I'm not missing anyone on updates. What was in the chat, Ellen? You're asking for the document that we're reviewing from Secretary Rollins?
Oh, no, it was directly to Liz Gleason. She left me a message this morning, and unfortunately with Teams, you can't direct message people.
Gotcha.
Hi, Ellen, I'll email it to you.
Thank you. I was trying to be surreptitious and just going direct to Liz for a document that had nothing to do with our meeting.
That's okay.
I think since we have a few minutes, it's worth, that this was included in the board packet. But I think it's, and Elizabeth Chadwick participated in the April board meeting. But now the governor, has officially decided to move forward with Elizabeth's appointment. So it's an official welcome this time. Elizabeth's biography was included in the board packet. So most people probably read that. But and Elizabeth will be participating in the June symposium. So it'll be a great opportunity to meet face to face. And yeah, I don't know, Elizabeth.
Hey, Liz, if it's easier with the.
That's
Elizabeth,
right. We discussed that. So you're happy to be Liz. That probably,
Yeah.
I mean, we do have one other Liz, but now we'll have two Liz's, two Elizabeths rather than three Elizabeths.
Liz Gleason and I can, hold up the Liz front.
It doesn't help that our last initials also rhyme.
Well,
Like
I was just
the-
saying Liz G and Liz C. That's like kind of catchy.
I think it's really catchy. Let's do it.
But we're, ecstatic to have you on the board, Elizabeth. I mean, Liz G, Liz C. And, I think Bob, who will be at the symposium, is also very excited that you're taking on this seat. So I think, as you saw in the board packet, Elizabeth Chadwick is taking over Bob's seat, as Bob has served his 3 full 3 full 3 years of tenure. So 9 years on the board in total. And we will be recognizing Bob, Will, Megan, and Charlie at the June board symposium for their years of service. They have all served the maximum number of terms that they're able to serve, which is 3 consecutive terms. So, we're losing some long time, pillar board members. But it's also exciting to, have new people join. But there will be some time at the June symposium where we will be properly thanking them and recognizing all of their service. And Charlie is going to come back. So Charlie was the current vice chair. Alicia Utter is currently the vice chair. And he left while I was on maternity leave, and he also left like in July where there was no board meeting. So there's really never a recognition or a thanks to Charlie. So he's going to join the June symposium as well, which is exciting. And he will not be clearly a voting member. He will be a member of the public participating. I think we are actively recruiting for the Ag and Forestry Funder seat. If anyone has any ideas, I reached out to somebody at Farm Credit East, Morgan Riling. Maybe some people know them. Her bandwidth, she travels a lot right now. She's actually a regional manager, so she's traveling across 7 states, and she just like, it wasn't going to work with her right now, like with her current commitments. But yeah, and I'm now in touch with Dave Lane from Farm Credit East. But if other board members have recommendations that I can bring to the nominating committee, please email me. The other seat that we are actively recruiting for is the Farm and Forestry Education seat, which is Megan Camp's current seat. I'm having a meeting at the end of this week with a potential member, but I honestly sense the bandwidth isn't going to work for them either. So would love recommendations from the board for the farm and forestry education seat. And I think Allison, due to Allison's outreach, I believe we have filled the dairy seat. We're waiting for official notification from the governor that they're going forward with the recommendation, but Stephanie Pope, after really like some pretty significant deliberation, which I appreciate because I think, there was thoughtful deliberation on the commitment, is excited to accept the seat if it is offered by the governor, and would be participating at the June symposium as well. And Allison, can you remind me the name of her farm? I'm blanking at the moment. Stephanie's farm.
Iroquois Acres. Yes.
Which
And,
is
They
yeah,
grew
go
up in
ahead.
Bridport, Vermont. And her sister also owns Bridport Creamery, which does the cheese curds, Nicole. So familiar with some value add as well.
And once that appointment is official, just as we shared with Elizabeth, we'll share, a full or a brief biography. And then we will have introductions be a part of the June symposium, face-to-face introductions. Because, honestly, I think, I still have my original ambition was to have all of the seats filled for the June symposium, which I don't think is impossible, but I would need y'all to send me recommendations, and they don't need to be fully appointed to participate in the June symposium, but we like to be like pretty advanced in the process because the public can participate. So yeah, please send your recommendations and thoughts on an ag and forestry enterprise funder or an education and forestry, an education and forestry member. Ag or forestry education member. Trying to think if there's other, I think, as you saw, we resent the invite as well, and I included it in the board packet, but the June 16th symposium will take place at Knoll Farm. They do pick your own blueberries, some wholesale blueberries, some value added, like popsicles and then they also do lamb, Icelandic sheep, or they do sheep. They do Icelandic sheep and sell, I believe, a lot of their sheep actually for like as like what do you call it? Like breeding, for breeding. Like they sell lamb, but they sell, I think, the majority of their lambs to other farms that are interested in raising Icelandic sheep. They also just they did a huge fundraising campaign to restore a very old barn. And so we're going to get to see the restored barn. And I think here, we can hear some about that process as well. But I believe that, yeah, Dana and Jack have just joined us. So welcome, and thank you for being here. We went over we already introduced to the board who each of you were very briefly, but I think it would be amazing to start off with introductions of each of you. I think for time, because we don't have a lot of time to for your presentation, I don't want to use it introducing each of the board members that are on the call today. But I will say that each board member represents a specific sector of the ag and forestry supply chains. And that's sort of the unique makeup of the Working Lands Enterprise Board. And then, as I shared via email, we're just so appreciative to have you joining us today, because this information is just coming at a perfect time as the board is about to transition into our FY26. So the strategic planning for our grant making in the upcoming fiscal year in June. So information from stakeholders is, essential and so appreciated at this time. So I'm going to pass it over to Dana and Jack.
Perfect. Good morning, everybody. I'm Dana Duran, Executive Director of the Professional Logging Contractors of the Northeast. I've got a PowerPoint, Elizabeth, that I'll bring up in a second, but I'll let Jack introduce himself, and then I can do that if that works.
Yeah, sure. Hi, I'm Jack Bell, and I'm co-founder and general manager for Longview Forest. We're based in Heartland and Westminster, Vermont, and do what I always say is everything that private forest landowners need in Vermont. We try to offer all of those services. And then we've also gotten involved in forestry equipment businesses in recent years. So we also import and distribute Rotney forest machines from Sweden. We bring them into Vermont and then distribute those to dealers in Maine and the upper Midwest and on the West Coast.
All right. So I will, is that all right to share my screen, Elizabeth?
Yes, definitely. Great. You got it.
Okay. Do you see my PowerPoint? I never know with Teams.
We do, but I think if you go, we also see your desktop. So if you go into the view, the slideshow, I think it should be able to, there we go.
Okay. Now.
From the beginning. Wait, sorry. Can you say full screen from the beginning?
Yeah.
Dana, the little green circle at the top left of your screen, there's a red one and then the green one. If you click on that, it'll make it bigger. Yep.
How's that?
So then if you go into presentation mode, we'll see the full slide, but it's fine. We can actually see your individual slides on the left. That's not the end of the world. We can see it pretty good.
Yeah, it's showing full screen on, I have two screens open. For some reason, it's showing on one and not the one you're seeing. So,
okay. Well, we can make this work. That's good.
We'll make it work. Yeah, we'll make it work. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here. So as I mentioned, the Professional Logging Contractors of the Northeast is a nonprofit educational association that was founded in the state of Maine in 1995. And it was created essentially to represent the interests of logging and trucking businesses throughout the state of Maine. So our member mission is to essentially advocate on behalf of the membership, but also to educate the public on responsible forest management and with the attempt to sustain the forest products industry. So just as brief background, as I mentioned, it was started in 1995 in Maine and existed in Maine for about 28 years. And then in 2022 or early 2023, we had a group of folks from the state of Vermont reach out to us to see if we could expand our organization and our footprint to start representing member small businesses outside of the state. And so in the end of 2023, we actually changed our name from PLC of Maine to PLC of the Northeast. And we now have close to 30 members from the state of Vermont, all logging and trucking businesses. And so you can see here the types of folks that we represent, but it's effectively it's businesses that work from stump to mill and all points in between. So we don't represent landowners, we don't represent mills or wood consuming mills. We essentially represent the folks who harvest and truck and process the wood before it gets to a mill. So you can see our representation of our membership, and we also now represent about 8 members in New York and a couple in New Hampshire, and we're quickly growing. But what is it that we do? So we effectively do 6 things. I'll run down through each of those. I'll come back to the advocacy piece because I think it touches upon what we're going to talk about today from our perspective and what we'd like to see the Working Lands Enterprise Board focus on with respect to timber harvesting contractors in Vermont. But on the advocacy front, we take a look at the economic impact of logging and trucking. So what you see before you are 3 publications that we put out on the state of Maine and the actual economic impact. We're working on one for the state of Vermont to hopefully release sometime in 2026. That really drills down only into the value of logging and trucking, the number of jobs, so on and so forth. 25 years ago, we created the Master Logger Certification Program as a way, and Jack's company is Master Logger certified. So this is a company recognition of timber harvesting values and work in the woods. And so this was created by the PLC back in the year 2000, and now exists in about 20 states in the United States, and it's also in the country of Colombia in South America, in Latvia, in Europe, and then in Japan and Australia on the far east. So we created that. We have an insurance program for our members through Acadia Insurance. We provide an extensive set of safety and member trainings for their employees. We just had a very successful training that we did in the state of Vermont at the end of April. We had about 75 or 80 folks from member companies over there on a multitude of different topics that impact the risk basis of contractors, both on the logging side, but also on the fleet and trucking side. We provide free CPR first aid to our members. We have an extensive online training platform related to safety and other topics for our members, all with the attempt to help their bottom line, help them become more profitable, manage their risk, etc. We created in 2016 a community college mechanized logging operations and forest trucking program in the state of Maine that's affiliated with the Maine Community College System. This program has now trained 100 new operators that have entered the field of logging and trucking. It's a 20-week training program where students attain a commercial driver's license, and they also operate 7 different pieces of equipment over the course of that 20-week program. We've actually had a couple of students from Vermont participate in the program, and the goal in the long run is to hopefully run something affiliated with Vermont Tech if possible. So community impact, we have a philanthropic program called Logaload for Kids. We raise money for Children's Hospital, including the University of Vermont Children's Hospital. At our annual meeting 2 Fridays ago, we raised $165,000 that gets split amongst the 3 hospitals. So we're very proud of that work. So let's move to logging in Vermont. So I'm not going to tell or give statistics that any of you probably aren't familiar with. This is just a direct kind of snapshot, but the data below, direct logging and trucking jobs, direct value add, et cetera, that's relatively old data at this point, 2017 data that has evolved and changed significantly. Our guess is that it is probably evolved and changed in a downward trend because of changes in markets, et cetera, that I'll go over in a moment. I do know that in Maine specifically, we've lost about 40% of the timber harvesting capacity just in the last 5 years alone because of lost markets, inflation, and a multitude of other reasons. So going directly to Vermont, the mill closures, I think you're all familiar with, but you've seen 3 specific mills in Vermont close in the last year alone: Putney Paper, A. Johnson, Mill River, and Clarendon. And then the mills in Maine that have closed have had a huge impact upon the ability to move wood from Vermont to other markets. Contractors have seen inflation on equipment parts, wages, and labor since 2020 of 40 to 50%. The tariffs certainly have had an impact upon steel prices and the ability to buy equipment. Interest rates are certainly not going in the right direction. And so that has pulled back building construction, renovations, et cetera, which has also had an enormous downward impact upon the markets for solid wood products. And then the impact of weather. Not so much the last winter, but the prior 2 to 3 years has had a huge impact on the ability for contractors to work in Vermont. The floods of 2023 and 2024, warm winters, et cetera, has really had a devastating impact. So moving to, our advocacy role, we do a lot of work in Washington, D.C. There's a quick overview of a lot of the successes we've had over the last 10 to 15 years to try to help with various pieces and parts of logging and trucking, especially in the Northeast. To Vermont specifically, 2024, we did a lot of work at the Vermont legislature, and this will transcend to what we're going to talk about in just a moment, and that is the needs of contractors with equipment. So because of all the challenges of weather and the floods and inability to operate, there was some funding that was passed in the last legislative session to help contractors with their acceptable management practices in Vermont, and that program is now being implemented in 2025 and 2026. We were involved in a timber trespass bill, created a program of scholarships for master loggers, and created the potential for VITA to provide lower interest loans for contractors. And we were involved in some legislation affecting the Rygate biomass plant. In 2025, so this legislative session, we had a bill in to help with offset or create a tax exemption for the purchase of heavy duty trucks, log trailers, chip vans, et cetera, for the logging industry. Logging equipment was tax exempt back in 2017 and 18, and this was an expansion of that. So this bill, or the two companion bills, I should say, are going to be held until 2026 at this point. So they're not going to move forward, but they are on the horizon. We've been working with our partners at Vermont Agency of Natural Resources and the Clean Water Board to create a revolving loan program to purchase low ground pressure equipment. And then lastly, we've been working on an economic assistance program at the legislature for contractors that have been impacted by storms. So that's a little bit of who we are and what we've been doing. I'll stop sharing my screen now and come back to really what Jack and I wanted to talk to this group about today. And that is, I think we've talked amongst our group. We have a steering committee of our members in Vermont. And as you saw, much of what contractors are dealing with because of lost markets, because of weather, et cetera, is you're seeing a huge transition of contractors in Vermont to try to deal with all of these very variable conditions. And so one of the big challenges they have is the high cost of equipment. And so, I think from our perspective, probably one of the greatest benefits that the Vermont Working Lands Enterprise Fund could have on contractors is potentially to provide some surgical grants to help contractors transition, whether it's from conventional to cut to length and mechanical, or to convert from tree length mechanical to cut to length, and to purchase lower ground pressure equipment, which will extend the amount of days and weeks that they can work throughout the year. And it also will help them transition from a lot of whole tree markets to a lot of more suited cut to length markets. So, and that I think would be a good partnership for some of the other programming we're working on with respect to loan capital. And the reason we're looking at all of this is that for some of you who don't operate in this world, a new cut to length harvester that's used in an operation could cost anywhere from $700,000 to $900,000 for a single piece of equipment. And then you also need a forwarder in order to move any of the wood that is cut by that harvester. So just to give you an idea, it's about $1.5 million to $1.7 million for two pieces of equipment in this business. And that doesn't matter if you're a startup or you are an existing business. It's a high capital high risk, low margin business. And to get folks the opportunity to work more days of the year, to operate in variable soil conditions with lower ground impact. I think this is a huge step forward, but it's a huge financial investment at the same time. So I'll stop there. Jack, I know you wanted to kind of give some thoughts on what you're seeing both in markets on the harvesting side, but also on the equipment sales side, and maybe give this group some of your thoughts and impressions and experiences, and then we can go Q&A from there.
Okay, yeah, sure. Dana covered a lot there. I would say that, you know, in Longview in our business, some things he hit on that are very, very much on our minds and have impacted our business greatly in recent years are the 18 months of wet weather that we had between November 2022 and April 2023. Like that hurt our business in a way that we've been in business 25 years, and that was pretty unprecedented period, as I know it was for a lot of people in Vermont, the amount of rain we got then. But, you know, we ended up, I think we borrowed something over $800,000 on our working capital line of credit through that period of time, and lost a lot of money in 2023 and 2024, and are just like really struggling to dig our way out of the hole that created in our business. If I go back 10 years, like 10 years ago, we were pretty much, you know, it was a simpler business. We were doing logging work and doing forest management work, and we did not own any excavation equipment. And we did not own or spend any money on wooden mats. We definitely had a couple portable bridges, but now today, like our logging production in our business it's about 45% of what it was in 2019. And we own, I think, 6 pieces of excavation equipment, and we spend somewhere between $25,000 and $50,000 a year every year now on wooden mats, ground mats, and other things that we need to put on the ground to operate. And certainly, like last year, you know, pretty much May through winter was like good logging weather. It was a big relief to have like really a pretty dryish summer and then decently cold winter. So that was a huge relief, but we've definitely seen this switch to where whether we like it or not, and this is true, I think, for almost every logging business, like throughout the region, like increasingly you have to diversify and do things that are not logging, things that you get paid to do, like excavation, land clearing, other things, if you're going to survive. I was just in Maine at the Bangor Logging Equipment Show, and Dana and PLC hosted an event on Friday evening for PLC members that were up there, and spent quite a bit of time talking with someone maybe some of you know, Zach Emerson and Sons Logging up in Groton. That's where they are, I think. And he's really struggling right now because their business is still all logging. And he was asking me, and we were talking for a long time about like how difficult it is to continue to be a straight forestry business. And so that is something that I think all loggers are facing. Yeah, and as Dana said, on the equipment side, like all of the equipment has, you know, as just about everything is, you know, with inflation and other things, been so much increase in the costs of doing business and the costs of all types of equipment. And it is really extreme on the forestry equipment side, though. 2 years ago at the PLC annual meeting, the PLC hosted this panel discussion amongst a bunch of the big forestry equipment manufacturers around innovations in logging equipment. And the audience was mostly what the audience wanted to talk to John Deere and Komatsu and Weiler Caterpillar about was like, how did they think that businesses were going to be paying for, $600,000-700,000 now for a piece of equipment that was $400,000 just a few years ago, that is not any more productive, working at basically the same sorts of rates. So, wood values of wood and rates for logging and trucking are, of course, they've moved a little bit over 25 years, but not really that much. But the equipment and the tools that loggers are using have, essentially doubled in price over 15 or so years, with 40% of that increase coming just in the last few years. So the technology is developing, but a lot of the mechanized logging technology is quite mature. Like the 80s, 90s, 2000s were when the sort of mechanized revolution happened in logging, and there were just huge productivity gains. But now the equipment is pretty, maybe there'll be another big step, but it's pretty mature. And so to have this stuff cost literally a couple $100,000 more for the same piece of equipment, and then to work at the same rates and have a challenge to have as many productive days of the year in the woods because of the increasingly wet weather, it's definitely I don't think logging's ever been easy, but it's definitely a very difficult time. There's a lot of soul searching going on in the whole logging community around like how do we continue to do this? It's what we love to do, but how are we going to continue to do this? So yeah. This session is to just, you're gathering, you said at the beginning, you're gathering feedback and input from stakeholders right now to get ready for the next cycle.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, I guess I'd just say like, the sort of things Dana was talking about, it's interest rates are huge, replacing the equipment is huge, transitioning to newer types of equipment is a big struggle. So anything that helps with that is a great thing. I don't, we applied for a working lands grant early years. I don't know how long ago it was, but it might have been one of the first years, and we didn't get it. And I've seen the materials every year since, and I would say that like, I'm sure it's complicated. I don't know how the process goes, but anything that you could do to make it easier for people to apply, the process of applying, because I know that, I remember that, and we haven't applied for many grants over the years, but it's often a pretty time-consuming process. And then there's the uncertainty of whether that time that you're putting in will amount to anything. And with the logging community, obviously most of the businesses in Vermont are very small. I mean, our business is probably one of the larger ones with 30 odd people. And so like, we're in a position where we do have, myself and others are in the office and at the computer a lot and all the time. So I'd say like, it should be easier for us to apply for this stuff, but I look at it every year and I think, that's gonna be a lot of work, and I don't know if that's what it's gonna amount to. And so when you think of people that are running businesses with 1, 2, 3, 4 people in them, and they're in the woods and operating equipment, and they have a little bit of time in the office, so to speak, nights and weekends, anything that could be done to make it just easier process to apply would be, I think, really helpful for logging and trucking operators. I think that's all I have to say.
So Elizabeth,
I
do you
think-
want us to give more recommendations at this point, or have you kind of heard, our approach and maybe open it up for Q&A now?
I think let's open it up for Q&A. Since we only have 10 minutes, if that makes sense. I'm happy to also, if anything, if there's a recommendation that, either hasn't already been made or you think of later, I can circulate things in writing also. And we're going to be, the forestry committee is going to be meeting on Wednesday this week. So if you want to share anything in writing before that, that's also welcome. But I think having 10 minutes of Q&A would be great. I'm going to ask a question while board members formulate their questions. So one of the things that the board has struggled with around, you mentioned the incredible cost of equipment. And in years where we've had larger allocations of funds, like in FY26, we will have $1 million total for funding. In years where we've had more funding, more allocation, more dollars, we've been able to offer grants up to $250,000. But, it's very, this year it is likely that the business grant will be, capped much lower than that. So my question is, is a low interest loan, with that, what would be the best, what would be the amount of funding that you feel like would be helpful for loggers trying to access some of this low ground pressure or newer equipment? Or would it be a down payment, or would it be, a low interest loan? What would be the best funding scenario for those loggers?
Sure. Yeah, good question. One, as you probably saw in my presentation, we've been working hard over the last couple of years in Vermont to create a low interest loan program. The work we did last session with Vita certainly was a step in the right direction, but right now interest rates are so high and markets are so challenged that folks are still, even if prime is 8% or 7.5%, and you can get a 1% or even 2%, you're still at 5.5%, and it's still beyond your means. So, if we can continue to work on a low interest loan that's really down below 2%, I think that would certainly be a real step in the right direction. Oliver Pearson is on here, and Oliver and I have been working on the clean water budget to try to create a pilot program for that very purpose. So that's headed in a direction. Trying to populate that fund with further funding certainly would be a huge component. But to that same note, if it's grant related, I'll say this, we've had a couple of our members that have applied and gotten working lands grants in the past, and they may have purchased a new excavator, or they may have invested in a portable sawmill, which is fine. But I think right now we're trying to be surgical, and it's this transition from one component of logging to lower ground pressure, ability to work longer day, more days, longer time frames. And I think, having something that is surgical, $25,000-$50,000 grants, that could almost cover the cost of interest if you were to go out and borrow that money. So that might be a real meaningful way to get more smaller grants in the hands of contractors, as long as they're for these specific purposes. And it's, again, very surgical, very specific equipment, tracked equipment, et cetera, et cetera. Like Sarah's got a question. Go ahead, Sarah.
Yeah, I do. And thank you very much for your presentation, Dana and Jack. Do you think that in terms of grants, that having down payment assistance from a grant would be helpful? I know you were mentioning about maybe covering the cost of interest, which is which is a good, interesting thought, but I'm also wondering if having an equity contribution up front would be seen as helpful.
Yeah. It's a valid question. So underwriting, especially on loans, as you know, from Vita's perspective, is very important. You got to understand the risk. So providing that down payment, but it's the but-for test. Are they a good risk? Do they have a business plan? Have they been in business? Are they able to then take on that loan? So I think it's a little bit of a chicken and the egg. I mean, I think from a business perspective, and I'd look for Jack's thoughts here, you want to make sure that business can afford that piece of equipment, that they have a plan, that they can make payments. So if they're going to go out and borrow capital, some of that skin in the game probably needs to come from them. And maybe it's either a buy down on principal, or it's the ability to offset, the interest payments, so to speak, over the long run.
What we've found is that sometimes, and we've tried to make these loans pretty accessible, but sometimes it's a lot different than going to a dealer for financing, even though the rate might be lower. And then the process of having a business plan and, providing a financial history, I think, is sometimes a little different than what people are used to. But I have seen, a number of different businesses that have gone into excavation as well, and maybe grinding. So it's good to hear you actually talk about that diversification that's often needed.
Diversification is good, but at the same, and that's become almost a must for logging businesses, is to be diversified. And at the same time, you're going to diversify yourself to a point where you're no longer logging, because that's going to be more profitable.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think on that last point, I remember there was under the Business Enhancement Grant Program most recently, I believe there was an application from a logger who was trying to diversify and get some equipment to expand into invasive species removal and other sort of non-commercial land management activities. And I don't believe that was a successful proposal at the end of the day for a couple different reasons, but that might be something that we explore explicitly, helping members of the call it logging community with is, if you're in a position where logging is only between 40 to 80% of your revenue, and you're looking for that other 20 to 60% to complement your work in direct logging and forest management, here's one explicit opportunity to support you in that respect. So that's an interesting idea. Dan, I take your last point though. If you diversify too much, you'll become an excavator as opposed to a logger, which we aren't really trying to achieve. I'll stop there.
Yeah, I think the diversification, it's essential. It's increasingly difficult to run a standalone logging business. So I think it's not so much in the discretionary category, and it's good, I think, in any business and activity to have some diversification. But I think if we want to continue to have a viable forest products industry and produce some of the wood products that we use, it is a very risky thing, because we talk about it all the time. It's just nonstop with loggers. Why are we even doing this? Because we love it, because we're committed to it, because we want to produce useful things, produce paper, lumber, wood products, but it doesn't make a lot of sense. So I would definitely rather see grants go directly towards the logging parts of things, because the land clearing, excavation, a lot of that takes care of itself. I think those businesses aren't easy, but they're definitely easier than logging. So grants focused on direct support of logging activities is a good idea. In terms of the down payment, the structure of things, I don't think there's, the down payment. I think some support like this, it sounds like the level of support that's likely going to be available is not going to you're not going to buy or not buy a $500,000 piece of equipment based on whether you get this working lands grant this year or not. But like certainly $25,000 of help with the down payment that's required, or just funds that are going to help you buffer the monthly payments for a period of time will be every bit of it will help. I don't know that down payment versus, I don't have a view there.
So we have two questions, Alex, and then Alan's hand went up. I also want to note, and Ellen, your hand went up. If everybody can, so we are also at time, is what I'm noticing, but Colleen has joined us. I don't think that Steve has joined yet, Colleen, so maybe we'll take one more question. And then I'm wondering if we can use the chat function. Alan and Ellen, if you can put your questions in the chat, and then if Jack or Dana, if one of you minds reading them, and like one of you could potentially respond to Alex's question out loud, and then I think we're gonna have to transition. So Alex, and then Ellen and Alan, if you can put your question in the chat. Or, yeah, okay, Alex.
Great. Do you see a place for the working lands to be supporting kind of what I think of as like the marketplace for logging? Not markets of wood, like that's a whole different thing, but more the clamoring of landowners to have good forestry done on their land. Because I think that's kind of a missing piece in a lot of what we're talking about here, because there is good ground to work in Vermont that can be worked in changing climate and wetness, but we don't see a constant sort of, will you come work my forest, please, from the clients who are the people, you know, across the state who might want that work done. So how could we support that? I don't know if a grant is the right way, but do you see any avenues for doing that?
I'll look for Jack to jump in. I mean, one of the big things that we've been working with Danny Fitzko and with Oliver and Catherine and et cetera, and that's been part of the roadmap discussion, is to do that promotion work. So whether or not that's the Vermont, Working Enterprise Fund, I'm not sure. That really is part of our discussion with the roadmap, and will continue as part of the roadmap. And it's a necessity. I mean, there's that, but that also has to be consistent. It can't be a grant and it's one and done. It has to be consistent. So I would really hope that that's a systemic component of the work that FPR does.
So Dana and Jack, you're welcome to stay on for the next presentation. It is from the Vermont Forest Products Association. I'm also wondering if you're willing to read the questions in the chat and respond in writing. If that's not something that feels comfortable, we could also just transition to email. Colleen, my question to you is, would you like to begin before Steve joins? Or
I'm fine with starting if you want to stay with the schedule.
Okay. So we did a overview of the agenda before you joined. But I will say again that the next presentation is from the Vermont Forest Products Association. We have on the call right now Colleen Goodridge, who is the first vice president, and Steve Hardy, who is the president, will be joining. Colleen, please feel free to add to that introduction. The only other thing that I will reiterate is that, this conversation is in preparation for the board's it's a stakeholder consultation prior to the budgeting and like strategic grant making conversations that the board will have in the summer, planning for our next year of grant making. So it's very timely, and we really appreciate you all taking the time to be here. And yeah, Dana and Jack, if you're willing to read those questions and put thoughts into the chat, that would be amazing. But Colleen, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Well, good morning on this beautiful sunny day. Well, the Working Lands Enterprise Initiative, someone asked me over my 51 years of owning and operating a sawmill and being part of the forest industry, what significant thing has occurred over those 50 years? And that I go back to Vermont Council on Rural Development doing their survey, finding the working lands, the farms and forests were the core values, and then the Working Lands Enterprise Initiative being formed after that, and the many good things that the Working Lands Board has done through providing assistance in many different areas. That certainly has helped sustain and grow forest industry businesses. I was reading the 2024 impact report, and all of your areas, business grants, service provider grants, producer grants, trade show assistance, all of those are very, very important to our end goal. And I would say that personally, we have benefited much from the business grants and the service provider grants. Service provider grants, we did business planning, succession planning. We did get help preparing for a loan application to Working Lands. And those services that were provided were invaluable for us to move forward with our three-phase power project, which we were awarded grant money to help bring three-phase power to the mill. Also in that round of grants, Tucker Riggs from Fletcher, forest sawmill expansion, got a significant grant as well. We did have to provide matching funds. However, without that, the grant money, these projects, I know both for Tucker and Goodrich Lumber, would not have brought us to another plane as far as working to be successful into the future. So I can't say enough about what you're doing, providing the grants through farm and forest viability and other programs. So important, whether you're thinking of starting a business, whether you're midway in business, or whether you're on the other end and want to know how to pass that business on. So good job on that to continue. And these business grants, the two infrastructure grants that were awarded to forestry businesses, which will directly support the logging community because we need those logs to operate, was a great help this year. And noting on how many fund requests there were versus funding. So you know that there is a need out there for different sorts of assistance. So whatever funds that are allocated, certainly you've got people requesting assistance. On page 4, we have updated roadmap strategies and strengthening the working lands, increasing businesses. And the number 4 was to improve operating environment for Vermont's agriculture and forestry businesses by serving as a credible and trusted voice to raise awareness and collaborate with partners about laws, regulations, and policies that impact working lands businesses. Sorry about that. How have you worked with that roadmap goal?
That's a question to the board, right?
Yes.
Somebody want to take a stab at it?
The reason I'm asking is because a lot of what is needed to sustain and grow and begin new businesses does take place in the policy arena in the state legislature. So I was just interested in how you, or to what extent you collaborate to support policies and so forth. And you don't have to answer it, but that was number
Well,
4 on your roadmap.
Colleen, this is Ellen. I'll just take a quick stab. We don't really have the capacity to weigh in on policy. It's not that we're not interested in it. It's just that oftentimes policy efforts are moving so fast that for this board to be fully up to speed on everything and then be able to act, unless we're requested to speak by a legislative committee, technically we have policy in our mandate, but we just to date have not had the capacity to be one of the players in those conversations.
And I would say, I certainly understand that. And thinking back, Elizabeth, we did have testimony for working lands and the importance of funding for this. So actually that was a way of having a conversation of the importance of supporting the program. So that would probably answer that question.
I think Pauline, I want to add one thing though. I think it's important just to state that there is a policy committee. And the way that the policy committee has decided to work, which I think is what Ellen was just saying, is it's by invitation. So when a group comes to the board and asks for a position, that request would go to the policy committee to decide, if they're willing to take a position, if they're willing to make a statement. Primarily the way the action that the policy committee has taken in the past is writing letters that make the position of the board clear around like different policy issues. But I think, as Ellen said, like, we don't spearhead policy change to date. But policy does, it remains a part of the mandate of the board from the original statute. Oliver.
Yeah, thanks. And Colleen, hi, Oliver Pearson with Forest Parks and Rec. I've been in my role for less than 2 years as the director for Forest, but we've really been trying to raise the profile of the forest products industry with the legislature. And I think under Commissioner Danny Fitzko's leadership, we've been successful in getting their committees of jurisdiction out into the woods, learning about the importance of active forest management and supporting the forest products industry, trying to ensure that changes to current use or use value appraisal aren't going to negatively impact landowners, licensed foresters and loggers, and other specific actions over the last 2 sessions to provide more support to the industry. Colleen, I'll say we've been more successful providing support to loggers, at least in my short time in the last 2 years, than we have to say working on policy that directly improves working conditions or provides enhancements to the processing side of the forest products industry. And we've had that conversation recently with Gwyn, who I believe represents VFPA, that there's, I think we should be giving some additional thought to how FPR can support policies that will advance the needs of the entire wood products industry. So while we've taken some small but important steps forward supporting loggers, I think we need to give some thought to how we can support mills, processors as well. And I look forward to those conversations with you, Gwyn, and others. Thank you.
Yes, and I would agree. I would agree that we have made progress and baby steps, but we're all wanting to reach that goal. And speaking of that, I read over some of the strategic roadmap goals and action plans, and one of the things was boosting the next generation of forest workers. And I think that is a key area of how do we do that? How do we reach that next generation? And it actually starts kindergarten up through with a whole educational process of what we do, why it's important, and not just for educational institutions, but as Alex said, the landowner population in general. Maybe folks have not had a chance to learn about forestry and managing forests. So I think one of the things we can do is, if there's anything we can do to get that next generation up and going, whether it's career exploration or funding for new businesses, certainly the business planning would be essential for this new group of workers. And I would say continue strengthening the industry service providers. That was also a bullet point. And looking to the future and helping to develop innovation and new products within the industry. What can we use all of our wood products for in new products that can be exciting? So that's what I would say as far as priorities is keep doing what you're doing. Let's see what we can do about the next generation and education and encouraging new businesses and innovation.
Do you mind opening it up to questions? Is that?
That's fine. Yep. What do you foresee? What is your feeling on resources that you will receive from the legislature this year, or where are you on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it seems like, and it was that we're solidly at $1 million. We're at the base. So there was that's the base funding. There were no one-time appropriations given to the Working Lands Enterprise Fund. And I noticed Alex has his hand up, unless Colleen, you have a follow-up thought. No. So, and just to put that into perspective, Colleen, that means, Goodridge Lumber benefited from one of the larger impact grants that had a, $250,000 ceiling max award amount. With $1 million base, there won't be impact grants, most likely. So it limits the grant opportunities to the business enhancement grant, which typically has a $50K max award. So we have a few questions. We have Alex and then Ellen.
Hey, Colleen, thank you. Question is I guess, I'm not super familiar with all the different members of VFPA, but I assume there are quite a few sort of what I would call very small scale, sort of wood miser kind of operations out there. People who are sawing small scale things. That's an area that we talk about a lot as being somewhere where smaller grants might actually make an impact, as opposed if we are not able to be making sort of $250,000 grants. Is there a good forum within VFPA that, are those people talking to each other? And how might we hear from them a little bit better as we think about how we can tailor grant applications to help serve that group of people?
Well, we do represent all sectors of the forest products industry, from the landowner right up through, and it is composed of very small operators, maybe sole proprietor to a medium-sized business to the larger manufacturer. So we do represent all, and I believe they all have their place in the scheme of things. We do have our meetings and speak generally, but we haven't had any conversations directed at any specific sized business. But we do represent all of them, and there's quite a variety of age, size, you name it. Makes it very interesting.
Thank you.
Ellen and then Liz.
Hi, Colleen, Ellen Kaler again. So just to follow up on a little bit of Elizabeth's question to you, and then also a little bit on the way that Alex framed his question. So the reality is we have $1 million to grant out this next year, right? We have typically between 350 and 400,000 is dedicated to technical assistance service providers that work directly with businesses in the industry, including the logging and forest sector businesses. So we have somewhere usually around 600,000 that then goes out in the form of grants to businesses next year. And of that, typically our ratio is about 40% for forest and 60% for ag and food. That's just historically how it's tended to sugar out. So if that were to play out again, the reality is we're looking at somewhere between $260,000 to $300,000 being available for grants to the forest products industry over this next year. So the question is, what do you think, given it's not a lot of money, we recognize that, we're really frustrated that we don't have more money to work with. But if that's all we have, what would you recommend to us as the highest priority use? What would give the biggest bang for the buck for having that little money to be able to distribute in small grants to the forest products industry? Where should we prioritize?
Well, if you get into infrastructure, that is generally a higher cost than, say, some business enhancement grants. So I think you'd have to balance out how much do you want to put for infrastructure, and how much do you want to put in for business enhancement grants. I mean, you're only going to be able to do so much for infrastructure and have some left for the other areas of, so I would say this last year was significant in the fact that you awarded 2 businesses with infrastructure grants. That ours was 220,000, and I think Tucker Riggs was more than that. So those 2 areas took up quite a bit of the infrastructure money. So I think it's important to fund some portion of that, but also to look at what are some of the other grants that could be spread out to sustain and grow businesses.
Thanks, Colleen.
Liz?
Hey, Colleen, nice to see you. I was wondering, you said something a couple minutes ago about innovation, and we've, like someone else mentioned a few minutes ago, we've definitely heard a lot about that gap in the small to medium sized sawmill. And I'm wondering if there's like any particularly innovative things that you're seeing in that space. I don't like to get too stuck on innovation because I feel like you can call anything innovation or nothing innovation, and a lot of times people are talking about tech, and that's not necessarily what I mean, but it stuck out to me. So I was wondering if you were thinking of anything in particular, especially around those small scale sawmills.
Well, our goal is to use all of the wood that comes out of the forest in a profitable way. So we know the low grade, for instance, is having trouble with that. I mean, there's areas that we can maybe find better uses for some of those, especially byproducts that have not to date been established to help us use the whole resource. I mean, we can make, we're not up to making a lot of the new insulation, and I shouldn't say that because maybe that's what's gonna take care of some of the byproducts that we have. But innovation of using our natural resource to the best and highest use, which will then put dollars in everyone's pocket in the supply chain.
Thanks, Colleen.
Any other questions? Colleen, either questions, from you to the board or from the board to Colleen. We can go either way.
I would just say thank you to all of you that devote your time to being on the board and wrestling with all these questions and do the best distributing the dollars and making sure that money gets used appropriately. I know the application process and I know the evaluation process, so just thank you for doing the great job that you do.
Yeah, and I would, thank you not only for being here today, and Steve is actually just joining. But also I want to I think the board knows that Goodridge Lumber also participated in testimony as a grantee during the legislative session. So we have so much gratitude. You guys have made time for both an interview and testimony on behalf of the Working Lands Fund. So I really appreciate that. So Steve has just joined. I think. Am I? Did I? Or maybe I.
Yeah, he's
yeah.
yep,
Steve,
right
yeah.
here.
Okay. So Colleen has been. We have.
Elizabeth, do you hear me?
Yes, I do hear you. Can you hear us? Can you hear me?
I
Can
may
you?
be on a limited band. I'm
Okay. Hmm.
Yep. Oh, you guys are 5x5. I could be limited on band. I'm in the woods parked, trying not to move.
Okay. I think so. Colleen has been.
If it's not coming in well enough, I'm sure Colleen covered it pretty well.
Yeah, Colleen, is there anything specifically that you would like Steve
Why
to?
don't you guys carry on?
Okay. Yeah, so I think, Steve, we were actually just wrapping up. Unless there's any, I think we have time for one more question from the board. If anybody has one last burning or not burning question.
Hello, can you hear me well enough, Elizabeth?
We hear you. If you have anything,
Okay.
we have about 6 minutes less, Steve, if there are any thoughts that you want to share with the board around funding priorities from the perspective of the Forest Products Association. We would welcome that. If not, we were taking
Are you
questions.
ready for me?
Yeah, I don't think your signal is strong enough, Steve. So I think we'll take a last question from the board before we have to transition into our next agenda
Well,
item.
Colleen and I, we spoke about the funding opportunities and things like that. And I'm good. I'm sure Colleen covered that. I'll just listen in while I'm here. It's limited. Not.
Okay, that sounds.
It's all right.
Yeah, so if there is a last question, now's the time to jump in. We need to transition now in at 10:40. So I have one question then, Colleen, and this is actually a question to you wearing your applicant hat. And it's about the process, because as you said, you really have been through the whole process. Is there anything, do you have any thoughts about the process itself and anything that could be improved? Hope you're muted.
Sorry, my barking dogs and my customer at the door. I would say that we did have help through Farm and Forest Viability and on helping organize our materials for the application and getting the application information into the portal, which was a great help. But I think one of the things in the service provider area is helping with grant applications. We may have the information, but we might not know where to put it or how to put it. So that would be a great help.
And so you found that support through Farm and Forest Viability to be incredibly helpful for your business applying?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And did you receive that support in person, or were you just communicating like at a distance with a business advisor?
We did meet periodically in person and then did other meetings via Zoom.
Mm-hmm.
Because of the distance.
Yep. No, that's really helpful.
That was crucial for us being able to go through the process and get the grant, right from the business planning to getting our information to getting it into the portal. We could not have done that ourselves.
Sarah?
Just a quick question, whether the Working Lands grant program needs to be publicized in some way that maybe isn't reaching forest products businesses. Including loggers.
I think that we're improving on that.
Yeah.
I know through our newsletter and our emails to the membership and so forth, we do try to keep it out front and center of opportunities that are available, and we just need to keep that communication going.
Liz, I think you're going to have the last question.
If we don't have time, I'll just leave it and as a question for that Forest Products Committee tomorrow. No worries. Just let me know.
We are right at time, so if you can hold it, I think that would probably be best to keeping us on time. But Colleen and Steve, we might have lost Steve, but Colleen and Steve, thank you both so much for joining today. And we will be in touch if there's follow-up questions from the information and questions that you've shared today. But we deeply appreciate the input.
Okay, thank you very much. Sorry for my interruptions.
Oh,
Bye.
no problem. Life goes on.
Yes, bye. Thank you.
It was great. The difficulties of technology sometimes.
I know. I think Steve told me that, and I knew he was going to be trying to join on his phone, and I think he even practiced it, but I think the signal was just not going to work out for him.
That's tough.
Yeah. And I think he was also receiving a delay, so it makes it even tougher.
Yeah.
But
we're good. So we're going to take a 10-minute break. Is that what we wish to do? So we'll turn off the recording and feel free to take a break for 10 minutes. We'll come back at 10:50. Thank you all.
Sounds great.
Okay, thank you. Good. The recording has started. So welcome to Jenny Porter. Jenny is going to continue with her presentation of the Trade Show Assistant Grant opportunities. Welcome, Jenny.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen so you all can see my slides. Okay, can you see these slides?
We can.
Okay, great. So hi, everyone. I'm Jenny Porter, she, her pronouns, and I took over managing the Trade Show Assistance Grants this past fall. So Kristen, who had been managing them previously, kind of held my hand in the beginning, and I went through a full application process. And I've been on board at the agency for just over a year now. Okay, let's see. So for those of you who aren't intimately familiar with TSAG, as we call it, this is a program that provides Vermont businesses with funds to attend trade shows that are targeting wholesale out-of-state buyers. This is particularly a good resource for value-added and specialty food businesses, as those tend to be the market for trade shows. The shows that we are supporting businesses in attending are business to business focused, not direct to consumer. So we're not, funding people to go to craft shows necessarily. They're more targeted at wholesale buyers. The shows that they attend can be domestic or international. They can be in Vermont as long as they're targeting out-of-state buyers. The goal is really to be expanding our out-of-state sales and relationships. Most of the shows people are attending are domestic. That often will have international buyers, but we aren't often sending people out of the country. Except this year in FY25, we are funding a business to attend a show in Colombia. So that's exciting. The program works on a reimbursement basis. It's up to a 50% reimbursement on eligible expenses, and we require a 50% cash match. Applicants can apply to attend up to 5 trade shows or get funding for 5 trade shows in a year, and they can't have attended any trade show more than 5 times already. And the grants are pretty small. They're $2,000 to $5,000. So to be eligible for TSAG, a business needs to be registered. Well, it needs to be based in Vermont, registered with the Secretary of State, and have been in business for over a year. They need to be headquartered in the state and have at least 3 or more wholesale accounts when they apply. And then new a couple years ago, all products that they want to sell at trade shows that we're supporting need to meet the Vermont local definition from outlined in Act 2129. The grants can cover most expenses that are associated with attending trade shows, with the exception of food, beverage, and labor, so like staff time. But other than that, we can cover most things: travel and accommodation, marketing assets, other marketing costs, booth design, booth fees, shipping and freight of product down to the show. So pretty comprehensive. And I wasn't sure if you all got an overview of FY23 last year, so I just thought I would just include it. Oh, I see a question. I'll pause for questions. Alex?
Thank you. Sorry. Could you just clarify the Vermont local piece? That's new to me. I don't know what that is.
Sure. So the Vermont local definition kind of has 3 buckets that a product can qualify. So if it's like an agricultural product, then it's that's the most straightforward. It's completely grown, raised in Vermont. Most of the products that we're looking at are falling into the like processed category, in which case the majority of ingredients are sourced locally within the state. And then there's this unique food product category that we actually see quite a bit because of the nature of specialty foods, which is a value add processed product where the ingredients cannot be sourced in the state. So an example would be like if somebody was a beverage maker and they used coffee, they have coffee beverages, like we can't grow coffee. And so in that case, they have to meet some specific or some requirements, like they need to be headquartered in the state, and like the transformation of the product has to happen in the state. And there's another one. I'm doing this all on memory. I probably should have had a slide for this.
Jenny, I dropped a link to the the webpage in the chat, which does a really nice job.
Yeah.
I've been in your shoes where you're trying to do this from memory. So if folks want to look at the website, it is outlined pretty clearly there.
Yeah.
Does it apply to wood products also, or is this only food?
Wood products, yeah. It's the definition doesn't really specifically call out wood products, so we get that question a lot, but we kind of just apply the spirit of it. So yeah, the wood products, like the wood would be locally sourced, or if the wood in question could not be sourced here, that it would be transformed here. I don't know when that would apply necessarily, but the wood product businesses that we've supported recently, are sourcing their wood locally. Does that sufficiently answer your question, Alex?
Yeah, thank you so much.
Okay, great. This comes up quite a bit now during the application process, just because the definition is really nuanced and it's trying to help businesses understand if they meet the criteria of the unique food product, and sometimes we're having difficult conversations around whether or not somebody believes that they could source their ingredients locally, and if we agree with that sometimes. So there is a little bit of nuance to be teased out there. Okay, so FY23, yeah, we saw a little over $100,000 of requests, and we funded about 50% of that to 13 applicants to attend 26 trade shows. We ended up deobligating 22% of those funds. Outcomes of the roughly $30,000 investment, we supported folks in attending 20 trade shows. They generated 610 leads for about $350,000 of sales from those leads, and 117 sales were placed at shows. The sales at shows, I don't think is a super great measure necessarily, because a lot of what we hear from folks is like the real value of attending these shows is the relationships not necessarily like sales placed at show. It's more about like finding distribution partners or finding a wholesale account, things like that. So FY24, which we are just wrapping up now. So FY24 grantees, their grant period closed at the end of March of this year. So we're just wrapping up all the reporting and claims now. We had $87,605 of requests. We awarded about 67% of that, for a total of 32 trade shows. And as of yesterday, we will be deobligating at least 31% of those funds and possibly up to 40%. We're waiting on one grantee who has an extension, but it's looking like they'll probably be deobligating up to $5,000. So I think we're going to be looking at a 40% deobligation rate. So far, so save one grantee who hasn't done their final report yet, we supported 22 trade shows, 1,600 leads roughly, for a little over $100,000 of sales and 200 sales placed at show. I thought I would just kind of highlight a couple FY24 grantees to give you a sense of what folks are doing with these funds. We have Trencher's Farmhouse, who makes artisanal handcrafted pasta out of locally sourced and grown ingredients. They received just under $5,000 to attend 2 trade shows, Good Food Mercantile and Summer Fancy Food Show, both in New York City. And this was their first time in attending both of these shows. They reported that the shows were a great success. They were really excited about them. They generated 186 leads. Those leads resulted in almost $6,000 in sales. But the real highlight for them is that they added 2 new distribution partners through folks they met at those shows, which was really big for them. And they had reapplied for FY25 funding and have received more funding to go to the Summer Fancy Food Show again this year. Then we have La Garagista, which makes naturally fermented wines from locally grown and sourced fruits. They received $5,000 to attend 4 trade shows. They ended up only spending about $2,300 of that for 3 shows, which is just a good demonstration of how folks often will not spend their whole award because they didn't anticipate things wouldn't cost as much, or they don't end up attending all shows that they had applied for. So for the 3 shows they did attend, they generated 115 leads and made over $17,000 from those leads. And one of their shows in particular was really successful and impactful for them. Wines by Nature in Ontario, which was their first time attending the show. It was their first time entering the Ontario market. They said the show was really successful. They participated in panel discussions, wine dinners, seminars, so they really kind of got their name and brand out there. They had a great sales response, over $10,000 committed from the leads. And they were really excited about this new market, expected Ontario to be their biggest market this year. And then the tariffs hit and have halted all sales. So not a great ending to this story, but it is a good example of how these funds and attending these shows can really open up new markets for folks, or potential new markets. Okay, and then this year, fiscal year 25, awards were sent out this past February. So folks are now, their grant period started April 1st. We had 23 applicants for a total request of a little over $106,000, which is up 21% from last year, but more on par with what we saw in 23. We were able to award 11 of those applications for just under $50,000, which is about a 50%, 47% funding rate. And so far, we've already deobligated, or will be deobligating, $4,700. We recently heard that a grantee's having a family issue and won't be able to attend shows this summer. But I'm trying to convince them to extend their grant rather than have to deobligate it. Okay, so you might have noticed the high deobligation rates in the last couple of years that I've talked about. So since 2019, oh, sorry, let me back up. Context for this. This is kind of one of the challenges of the program that I just wanted to present to you all today, is the fact that we have such a high deobligation rate for such a small grant that has a really high administrative burden. So in the last 5 grant cycles, we've had a 30% average deobligation rate. And the reasons for that are many. Sometimes people are just have like change their plans, whether or not they just decide they don't want to go to that show anymore, or it doesn't make sense for the business, or life happens and they have personal reasons they can't attend it. That I'd say like that's the majority of cases, change of plans. Sometimes a show gets canceled, which is out of their hands and doesn't happen that often. And then the personal reasons is less often too. But I would just say like often we hear folks say like, oh, it didn't make sense anymore. And we are asking people to plan, like a year out. And so it's kind of just difficult to decide what shows you want to do that far out. I see a question. I'll pause for a question. Donna?
Yeah, I was just curious what the application process involves. I mean, is it because it's not a very thorough application that people just kind of write down some trade shows they think they want to go to and maybe don't think it through, or?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say overall the application is pretty thorough for the size of grant. For a $2,000 to $5,000 grant, like we're asking them to do quite a thorough application. We ask them to identify each trade show they want to attend, explain why they want to attend it, why it makes sense for their specific, for the timing, why the timing makes sense. If they have distributors already in that who attend that show, I think it's a pretty thorough vetting process, and that's usually where, like, if somebody's not going to be funded, it's usually because that part of their application is lacking enough detail and we don't feel confident that they've done their research. So that's definitely something we are looking towards. I can't, I don't know how much more we could ask of them to demonstrate to us that it makes sense, especially for businesses who haven't attended a show before. It can be difficult for them just to kind of know, like, unless you've been to the show and walked the floor, it's just like trade shows are a little bit of a unique beast in that maybe people just don't have a good understanding. But I do think it's a pretty thorough application, and I would be hesitant to add more to it given how much money we're actually giving people. Was there another question?
I was just going to add, I think everything Jenny just said is spot on. I think there's kind of 2 other things. Like, one is that it's a reimbursement grant, right? So we're not giving people money up front and then kind of holding them to that commitment. So there's a little easier, I think, to back out in the reimbursement model. And then I think the other piece is just the timing. So like trade shows are happening all year long, and some businesses are targeting trade shows that may be happening 11 months after the application opens. And so people are putting in their marketing plan for the year and saying, yeah, I think I'll do this and this and this. And then 10 months later, they realize that things have changed or something's come up. So I think that timing piece is another important factor.
Yeah, thanks, Trevor. Yeah, so I guess I think this is my last slide. I just leave that all with you because that's something our team is internally talking about right now is, what we can do to address the fact that so much work is put into administering this grant. And, it's really disheartening, especially this year when up to 40% of funds are not going to be spent and not going to be benefiting businesses, the time spent on each grantee for like such small dollars seems disproportional. I saw a hand.
Well, I want to make one correction. So the funds are spent. So some of these deobligated funds we immediately wrapped into business enhancement. That's why we were able to grant a higher dollar amount than we had originally allocated. So the funds are absolutely spent, but they're not, spent for their original purpose. And there is, the administrative burden that Jenny talked about still in processing a grant, and then, selecting, or processing an application on the grantee's part, selecting the applicant, and then deobligating it from the administrative side. Allison?
Yeah, I was just wondering about some of the things that you were considering that might help to reduce the deobligation rate, like changing the time frame of the grants, maybe making them available for like multiple times a year. I mean, it probably drives up the administrative, but I don't know.
Yeah, I will say that we haven't identified any clear solutions right now. We're kind of just starting the conversations of like, this is interesting. What can we do about this? And I have limited institutional knowledge as I've only gone through one grant cycle, but I do know that the timing of the grant has been changed or tinkered with over the years in order to address administrative burden. And so I'm not sure, maybe Trevor can speak to this as to like how successful the other, when it was offered more frequently. I think that would, like you said, just would actually drive up administrative burden. Trevor, do you have any more to add to like what other timing schedules had been tried in the past?
We've discussed internally, like, could we do, and actually Laura Ginsburg may have something to offer if she's still on, because the DBIC offers a trade show grant and they have a rolling application. And we've thought about, could we do something like that, or could we kind of split it up and offer like a winter application and a summer application? I'm not recalling all of the details of those conversations. I think we're happy to kind of go back and look at that. And I think that's certainly on the table. Is that going to make it easier to actually ensure people follow through with their plans? Because I do think that like that timing piece is a big part of it, where things just shift. If you have to apply, we host it, we offer it in the winter, because even though trade shows are happening all year long, they kind of are concentrated in the summer season. And that's where we see most of the applicants wanting to do activities. But yeah, I think we're very open to like other structures, other ways that the grant could be offered in order to kind of reconcile some of that and make it easier for folks. And there is the administrative burden consideration for sure, but I think that's just one consideration. Like, I don't think our team looks at that and says, there's no way to do it, but would love to hear from Laura. I see she's got her hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Trevor. The Dairy Innovation Center does offer a trade show grant that was modeled off of this one. And it's just for dairy. So it's just for dairy products. And it's for the 11 states of the region. Our grant is a little bit different in that our grant range is $5,000 to $20,000. And I'm looking at the ones that we funded in the last round, which we closed in the fall of last year. Actually, we had one more in the spring of this year. But the average application is awarded $14,700. So they are substantially larger grants. We do accept them, or we have accepted them on a rolling basis.
and we review, depending on the applications that come in, roughly monthly, but no less than quarterly. So, we put the funds out in a smaller dollar amount. For example, this last round, we said we had $150,000 available, and we take applications until we grant out all the money. But we're not reviewing them as they come in. We have a set date when we look at everything that's come in. We don't experience the same levels of deobligation. I would say the vast majority of people spend all of the money that they are awarded. And I do think that's maybe because of the larger grant size. I'm not exactly sure. It'd be interesting for us internally to look at the differences between the programs. And we are funding very similar things. So travel, event costs, booth fees, product shipping, development of materials. Yeah, I don't know if there's any other specific questions. I'll put in the link in the chat to the program that we have through the Dairy Innovation Center.
Thanks, Laura. So I think, right now, as Jenny said, we're thinking about this internally, and we plan to have a proposal or some ideas to share with the board at the June symposium. And it is time for us to transition to our next presentation. So thank you, Jenny, for sharing this information and for being with us today. And so, to be continued on this conversation at the June symposium. And yeah, so right now we are transitioning to our final presentation from the Vermont Economic Development Authority. We have our Sarah from the board, but also joining Sarah is Andy Wood. And Andy, we have not been going around for the sake of time and asking all board members to introduce themselves. But I have just been, and I think you're quite familiar with the board and the program, but as a reminder, there are every seat on the board represents a very distinct part of the forestry and agricultural supply chains. And we're so excited to hear from both of you as the board transitions into their decision-making period for next year's funding strategy. So Sarah and Andy, please take it away.
Yeah. Well, I'll get started here. I'm really pleased that Andy's able to join us today, and he is now the Director of Agricultural Lending. And VITA's been in business since 1974, making loans to Vermont businesses, and began making loans as well to Vermont farms in the late 1980s. And then we expanded into also doing loans for the forestry sector, and have really expanded what we've been able to do through the past 50 years here, which is pretty amazing. And Andy and I work closely together with a team of loan officers and other staff. Our CEO is currently Cassie Bohemus, whom some of you probably know. Joan Goldstein, who was formerly with ACCD, is succeeding her as CEO effective July 1st, but they're working together for 2 months. So we are in a period of transition here. And I serve on the Working Lands Enterprise Board as designee for the CEO. So that's a little bit of background on kind of who VITA is. As I said, the idea really is to provide financing programs to Vermont businesses and farms and forestry businesses, typically that are not getting their needs met at reasonable rates and terms by other lenders. And we often participate with other lenders, including Farm Service Agency and banks, and sometimes with Farm Credit. So we try to be pretty nimble in terms of what we can do. And I think I'll go over to you, Andy, here to expand a bit.
Yeah, sure. Appreciate the opportunity to discuss here today with the group what we do and what we see in the industry. So as Sarah says, we offer a wide range of financing tools. Financing is our primary tool with both commercial loan programs, energy loan programs, and then what we'll talk about mostly today, our agricultural and forestry program, which is done, may also be referred to as the Vermont Ag Credit Corporation, although most of our branding today is done still under the umbrella of VITA for that. Maybe of note to this would be that VITA also does administer some affiliate programs for the state as well, but it's our commercial energy and ag programs which are probably of most interest here. We have a portfolio of about $87 million in loans, working with over 300 Vermont farms, forest business, and other closely associated businesses. And what else did I want to say? Our portfolio, dairy makes up the largest segment of our portfolio, representing about 40% of our portfolio. Maple is our next biggest segment, and then it's followed up with a variety of additional businesses, diversified businesses, so beef, grain, crop production, vegetable, apples, and then some value-added production, forestry. And I'm sure there are others. We offer a wide range of loan products. I like to say that we can lend money for anything that's to the betterment of the business. But lines of credit for annual operating needs, operating loans for things like equipment or other needs, and then real estate loans for purchases or real estate improvements. So a wide range of needs, working with a wide range of customers. I think that covered a lot of things. One thing I do want to note is just, we are an opportunity for people where they need funding, where they may not be having their needs met. So where they may be looking for a grant and don't get funding, the opportunity, that we could have conversations with them about whether or not financing could help meet some of those needs, are conversations we always are happy to have. And Sarah, I'll kick it back over to you to add anything else that might be relevant.
Yeah, one of the things that we are able to do is sometimes to lend to businesses that have been approved for Working Lands Enterprise grants or for other grants, whether they be NRCS or really any other type. And we can also do bridge financing because sometimes grants, as we know here, are on a reimbursement basis. So we can do bridge loans where we know that a grant has been approved, and to help facilitate the business moving ahead with getting it completed and then getting reimbursed with loan funds. And the forestry loan program has worked out really well. We worked with FPR on that, and we've been able to offer a 2% reduction in most cases to forestry businesses. Often it's been for low impact equipment. Sometimes it's actually been for real estate purchases or improvements. And we've closed just about $2.2 million worth of loans to a dozen businesses, including one which is that was approved as a commercial loan. But it was really great to work with the agencies on that, really on that endeavor, and with Dana Duran and some other folks to get it publicized, because it has seemed that like it can be a challenge to reach out to the forestry sector and like really gain the confidence of some of those businesses, and so the collaboration has worked really well. We're always thinking too about, well, like what's the best use of our funds? What are the gaps? And then with this conversation as well with the board here, Andy and I were talking a little bit about like what's the best use of WLEB funds, especially with it limited to $1 million this year. And you know, thinking, and join in, Andy, if you'd like here anytime. You know, thinking a little bit about, well, like what are the projects that the board really gets excited about? Is it innovation, or is it helping you know, small businesses to succeed, or is it helping businesses to expand? Really like thinking about what does the board really value? And then I think also for us to think about like kind of like what the split is between ag and forestry. And you know, and doing whatever we can as a lender to help facilitate any of that.
I think, do we want to open it up for questions at this point, Sarah, or?
I think so. I guess I would just expand a little bit on like what you mentioned, Andy, is that we can do everything from real estate loans to operating loans, which are for livestock, machinery, and equipment. Also for working like revolving lines of credit, working capital. So we can do the full array of loan funds. In some cases, we do finance housing, whether it be labor housing or housing that is actually for the farmers themselves. And we do feel that that's an important part of the work that we do. It certainly meets a need, and we generally do it for a business that is established. And we also really think about like what are emerging markets, like beef on dairy has been, and those crosses was something that was recognized by the Working Lands Board as an opportunity. And then like right now I'm working on a loan for somebody who's a grain grower who wants to bring his business to Vermont from out of state, which is pretty exciting. So it really runs the gamut of financing programs. And I would be happy to open up to questions and suggestions.
There anything? There we go.
Alex.
This will probably be a rather ignorant question, but how does Vita relate or fit into the ecosystem of financing with like farm credit, banks, just in general? Like, how do you find customers essentially, and what are you hitting there that's special versus simply going to farm credit?
It's a great question. I'd love to be able to really distinctly answer how they find us, but they come to us through a variety of sources. You know, but we try to be, you know, an opportunity for credit for really businesses of all across the gamut. So some businesses will choose to work with us because they prefer the customer service that we get over farm credit or elsewhere. Banks within the state, local banks definitely do some agricultural lending. I don't want to say they don't, but when we look at the spectrum, at the demand for lending for agriculture and the amount of lending that banks do, they don't fill that gap. So farm credit is the primary lender in that space. So I do believe there's some benefit for us to operate a program that provides, reasonable rates and terms to balance out having, one large player in the market. I don't think that is a healthy market. With that, we're always happy to partner with banks or whoever, if that is how they want. And then risk tolerance, right? We are a quasi-governmental or mission-based lender. While we're always excited to work with very good businesses and strong businesses, we also do try to run the gamut and be willing to take an appropriate but more risk as a mission-based lender.
Abby?
Yeah, Andy and Sarah, quick question. We heard earlier that for some of the businesses in the forestry sector that are making big cost equipment purchases, an interest rate of 2% or less was desirable. Does that fit within the portfolio options that exist at Vita, or
No.
close within that range?
The simple answer is no. For us to offer a rate of that low, we would have to have a funding source, right? And a funding source and something that covers some of our operating costs. Right. If we had a 0% funding source for loans, we could probably offer that 2% rate, maybe. Even that 2% would be tough for us to cover all of our costs. But we, as an institution, borrow a large portion of the money that we lend to the businesses we work with. So we borrow at a considerably higher rate than 2% in today's market. And so it's not something that we were able to do. Now, if there were funding available to either directly fund those loans or buy down interest rates, certainly we could work with that. And we have run programs in the past that do exactly that. Not necessarily to that extent, but it is, there's no direct and easy way to offer a loan at that rate without funding.
Do you have do you ever look at the requests in a given year by like trends, like, X% of our, forestry applicants were requesting, excavators, or like, are there trends that really stick out where you're like, wow, all of a sudden we're receiving, a number of applications for like, climate adaptation initiatives, or like, are there any trends that, even if it's maybe not based on like specific percentages, just things that you've observed?
I appreciate the question, and I'll share some of the anecdotal thoughts I have on that. We are small enough where trying to extrapolate out any trends are dangerous, right? If I say, boy, we had robust things happening in Maple last year, it's really 18 projects or something like that. It was very robust for us, but not enough for me to dangerous to extrapolate that out to an industry-wide thing. But with that said, for us, we have been seeing some really good growth in our maple business. I'm not really sure that is new business to the industry, but maybe some new customers to us based on some favorable pricing. But some of them being younger producers, taking over family operations or things like that, in a really healthy maple economy currently. I do think that segment of the industry has had some pretty stable pricing for quite a while. And we've seen some really strong businesses in that industry doing some innovative things and continuing to reinvest in that is one area. I think our beef, we have more farmers that are dedicated to beef production today as a primary enterprise, doing it as their primary source of income, where I feel like more of them, if we looked historically, probably had a more diversified income stream. Although, again, that's a handful of customers for us in that realm. Dairy remains a very strong part of our portfolio, and I do think it's been a rough decade or so for dairy in some ways, but I do believe that the dairy industry that we have today is very resilient as a whole, and I know we're pretty happy with the overall the portfolio of dairy customers that we work with today. Yeah, I think anything you want to add to that, Sarah?
I would guess I would just focus on the forestry type loans a little bit. And there's been a real variety of what we've been able to finance, anything from firewood processor. We've done some refinancing of open accounts. We financed a skidder, a wood boiler, 2 trucks. We financed one or two log trucks actually, and then I think we also financed a truck that was to deliver firewood, and a couple of our larger projects have been for firewood processors. So it's really been quite an array. We had someone who financed a large chipper grinder, where they felt that was an important component of their business. And as was talked about earlier with Dana and other folks, we have seen loggers diversify a bit, and some of the requests that we've had have been to help with that diversification, along with general logging equipment.
I have another question while board members are reflecting. On the loan application process, are folks normally sitting in your office with somebody filling that out? Like, I think again, we've just been talking about the challenges to especially small businesses, like having the time and like the bandwidth to work on applications. Like, I know you request financial documentation just as we do. Like, what's the level of service provision to clients?
It definitely runs the gamut on that, although I will say at a certain point, if they need services to generate certain financials, we will be recommending them to technical assistance providers.
Yeah.
Most of the time, they're completing our application form and submitting the initial financials largely independently most of the time. With the balance sheet is the one form that may take a while for them to fill out. And in some instances, we may be meeting with them or something to collect that. But most of the time they are submitting it with their application. Maybe some of our more longer term existing borrowers may have a slightly different experience where we meet with them to update existing information we have on our file. But most of the time the application will be completed and sent in. With that said, some inquiries, some things, occasionally we might meet with a customer and complete the application with them. But if they need a high level of assistance with financial preparation or other things, we're referring them to technical assistance. That's not our role.
Pretty quiet group.
Yep.
Sarah, did Vita also financed a kiln or two, correct? Did we finance a kiln?
One of our borrowers
Yeah.
has a kiln. I
Yeah.
think we financed one, and I think one of his is grant funded, I believe.
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah, we financed baskets for a kiln, like the wood baskets. So, yeah.
What are your minimum and maximum loan sizes?
The minimum is technically doesn't, I don't believe we technically have a minimum, although I would say $5,000 is probably the minimum, but realistically, it's more, unless it's part of some adjoining project, it's probably more like $25,000 is the practical minimum based on some of our fees. We charge a minimum $250 and have some other fees. Not to say we don't do, but our technical minimum, there is no technical minimum. Although if somebody came to us for a few $1,000s, we will look to refer them to more appropriate resources for that dollar amount. Our maximum amount is technically $5 million, and nothing to prevent us from doing that. In practice, we haven't done anything over about 2.5 million. It's probably around our largest projects are in that ballpark.
Yeah. We are governed by state statute. So, as part of being an authority. We're also happy to, chat with anyone who has any questions for us after the meeting.
Allison, I think you're muted. Or were you? I think you
Yeah,
were.
I think we should move on if there's no other questions rather than keeping Andy hanging on here. Unless there's questions, please raise your hand. Otherwise, we will dismiss Andy. Thank you, Andy, for spending time with us. And I'm sure if folks have questions, he'd be happy to answer outside of the meeting as well.
Yes, thank you for having me. And as Allison just said, I'm always happy to discuss any questions or any projects or any ideas. Always happy to take an email or a phone call.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Andy.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah, as well. Sorry you have to stay. I did notice too that Elizabeth Nance has joined us, and we had done administration updates earlier, and I wonder if this is a good time perhaps to ask you if ACCD has an update.
Oliver also joined, Allison, just.
Excellent. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's do that.
Thank you for the opportunity. I don't think I have any updates. Other than I'm down to one crutch.
Very good. Progress, right?
Yes, as of this morning. So,
excellent.
Yeah, no, I don't think we have any updates.
Okay. Glad to hear you're recovering well.
Yeah, thank you.
Excellent. We will turn over to Oliver for FPR updates.
Thank you, Allison. Certainly a lot going on. A couple things I'll mention vis-a-vis the legislature. A number of actors, including FPR, providing testimony about a potential extension for the Rygate woody biomass plant to achieve some efficiency requirements. I'll be there at 1 o'clock, so I need to leave soon to give more testimony on that. So if that bill is passed, it would give Rygate another year to make progress on achieving their increased efficiency requirements that are in statute. They need to achieve 50% efficiency from, I think, a current level of 23. They plan to do that by utilizing excess heat to dry chips and possibly to make pellets. and just for various reasons, they've run into some delays in making those enhancements to the plant, and are seeking another year to get to the interim milestone, and that would kick the completion of the process out by another year as well. I think if they do not receive the extension, it's possible that the power purchase agreement they have with the state would become null and void, and then they'd have to sell their power independently to utilities, which could be challenging without the sort of the subsidy that the state provides. So that extension has been tacked on to the miscellaneous environment bill. So committees of jurisdiction are House Environment and Senate Natural Resource and Environment. So we'll see how far that one gets in the remaining week and a half of this session. We're supporting a bill about legal trails that would authorize towns to maintain legal trails. This is part, I think, of a transport or highway bill. It's important for recreation, and it's based out of a lawsuit from a landowner in Tunbridge who had some issues with trail maintenance on a legal trail that was on his property. And we're also we have a rule and we have statute and a rule about heavy cut, which is when you cut more than 40 acres below the sea line, which is a silvicultural sort of threshold for how much wood you take out. And that's a very old rule. It wasn't passed to be a formal rulemaking, but it was initially passed as an emergency rule, and then it was codified by the legislature. So we thought the rule was fine. Turns out the Administrative Procedures Act was amended in 2016, requiring all rules to be published. By 2018, or the rules are no longer valid. That was an effort to get state government to be more transparent about rules. And we missed that at the time, so we did not publish the heavy cutting rule. And some attorneys will point out that as a result, our rule is no longer in effect. So we're seeking a legislative fix to sort of give us a notwithstanding the amendment to the Administrative Procedures Act, the heavy cut rule is still in place, and that's important to get. The heavy cut rule allows us to enforce the heavy cut statute and has some silvicultural prescriptions and silvicultural guidance in it, which is very useful as well. So we're trying to attach that to the miscellaneous ag bill by the end of the session, and that's looking good right now. So that's what's happening in the legislature. I think the other thing we'd say is we're sort of watching what's happening at the federal level with both funding and reorganization of the U.S. Forest Service, who's a very important partner for us in Vermont, very, very carefully. Federal 25 federal 25 funding levels, because of the continuing resolution, will hopefully be level from federal 24, but we're seeing, of course, huge proposed changes in both organization and funding for federal 26, including the elimination of state, private, and tribal forestry in the president's so-called skinny budget, which would be a big change for how we interact with the U.S. Forest Service, as well as taking wildland fire management out of USDA and setting up a new independent wildland fire agency and DOI, Department of Interior, which would be a huge change as well. So we're watching these points at the federal level and advocating as much as we're allowed to through the administration to our congressional delegation, who can hopefully resist or propose alternative approaches to some of these major changes that are in the president's budget for federal 26. So that's what comes to mind. Allison, I think I'll stop there.
Excellent. Thank you, Oliver. Are there any questions? Your rule that you're trying to get fixed in the miscellaneous ag bill, we have two miscellaneous ag. Is that S124 or H484?
I think it's the former, but I'm not 100% sure. Our attorney, Megan Purvey, has been more directly involved in that. We did it was the miscellaneous ag bill for which there's testimony in Senate Finance last Friday, and we were in there for about 3 minutes. And they said
H484.
H44. Okay. So they said check with your two committees of jurisdiction, and if they're okay with it, we're okay with it. And so that's what we're trying to nail down right now. But it's, as I said, it's looking good.
I'll just let our general counsel know as well, so we're all on the same page. Yeah, thank you. Are there any questions of Oliver? Not seeing any. I think we can move over to other announcements or business. I noticed on Elizabeth's email with the agenda that it had the location of the June symposium. And I just want to say that I think in your GPS it comes up as Waitsfield as the town. And that is, trying to remember what town you say it's in on the email. Starts with an
I think
F.
Facein
There you
is
go.
what,
Okay.
I think that's the town it's maybe physically in, but it is true that sometimes
So we
the-
all make it there together.
Yeah.
Give you a little heads up on the GPS when you put it in. So it'd be great to see everybody in person in June. Some of us for the last time on this board. Thank you, Megan Camp, and others who have been on for the duration of your stay. What an accomplishment. Excellent. So I think at this point, Elizabeth, unless you have something else that you'd like to bring up to the board, we could adjourn.
Nope, I think just, keep your eye out for the packet. The board packet will be coming your way prior to the symposium. There does tend to be, it's not going to be like heavy, but some documents to review prior to the symposium that allows the conversation to be more productive. And that will be the case this year as well. And, we'll be including some of the question prompts that we'll be discussing during the symposium. So for those of you who like to sit with information, sit with a question and not have it, be asked, once you arrive, that will be available in the packet. So read that over closely. And as always, I will be sending an email closer to the date, but if your attendance changes, definitely let me know, because we give a final count for meals 2 weeks prior to the symposium, and there is like a budget implication there. So it is helpful to know if something changes for you 2 weeks prior. If it's less than 2 weeks, contractually, we will pay for the meal anyway. So
Thank you.
Thank you all.
All right. Thank you for your time today. I will officially need a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Megan, for the second. All those in favor say aye.
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 Thank you. Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Thank you all. Have a good week. Hope the sun comes out.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.